meetings for our Redwood camp meeting, even though we're not together, and I wish we were up there. I was walking through some bay leaves the other day, and it reminded me of being in Redwood, smelling the bay leaves on the ground. But we're going to have some fun anyways. Well, the story I'm about to tell you is true. It comes from a part of the world where it is common for pastors' wives to have a choir, and maybe even some competition between the pastors' wives and their choirs. But this particular one is traveling on Sabbath. And you know how it goes. After a while, they need to make a pit stop, and so they make a pit stop. And as the pastor's wife is making her way to the restroom, she has to go through a gift shop to get there. And as she goes through the gift shop, she sees something she really, really wants. Now, I don't know what it was. I wish I knew what really spoke to her and why she really wanted this item, but she wants it. Now she's got a quandary. Like, I'm not coming back to this area anytime soon, and it's Sabbath, so I can't buy it, and I can't come back. So how do I get this thing I want and yet keep the Sabbath? So she prays about it, and she believes that God gives her the answer. She just took it. She didn't buy on Sabbath. Now you may be laughing going, whoa, okay, you kept the Sabbath by not buying, but you broke the commandment, thou shalt not steal. But here's the catch. I think a lot of us have that very narrow band view of the Sabbath like that pastor's wife. You know, we will keep the Sabbath in one sphere, but then fail it in other ways, like that pastor's wife. I don't think she's alone. And here's part of our challenge. In our evangelistic series, we will spend so much time trying to educate people on what day is the Sabbath. It's not Sunday, it's Saturday. And people get it. And it's a little bit like a dog chasing a car. Have you ever wondered what the dog was ever going to do with the car if they ever caught it? Now what? And we leave people with the Sabbath. They've got that it's Saturday, but now what? I want to invite you to open up your Bibles as we explore the now what, the excitement, the awesomeness of Sabbath Nuach. The writer of Hebrews chapter 4 starts out with this passage in verse 1. He says this, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. Now, the short version of this is that the writer of Hebrews is trying to use Sabbath as an analogy to salvation rest. And so he says, what is the best concept I can think of rest? Well, it's the Sabbath. And so it doesn't really work on several fronts. If you don't understand the Sabbath, you would not understand his analogy. And that also keeps if they weren't keeping the Sabbath back then, that analogy wouldn't work then either. So obviously this is an example, a reason, I would say some evidence that they were keeping the Sabbath back in that day. And in fact, in verse 9, he uses a term that we find nowhere else in the Bible. He calls it Sabbath rest. We don't even know if the writer of Hebrews actually coined that term, but we can't find it anywhere else until I found here in verse 9 of chapter 4. He continues on, and I want you to listen for a word. One particular word here, rest. Rest. Looking at Hebrews 4:4-6. If you get your Bibles with you, you can kind of be interactive with me as we read together. Hebrews 4:4-6. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in these words. On the seventh day, God rested. There's one word. God rested from all his works. And again, in the passage above, he says, they shall never enter my rest. Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of their disobedience. Now, the book of Hebrews is written in Greek. We know that. But he's writing to a Hebrew audience, Hebrews. And so he's citing a lot of things from the Old Testament, including sections in this passage we just read are coming from the Old Testament. And so his whole thinking here is Old Testament concept of Sabbath rest. And so you got to understand where he's coming from. And the passages he's quoting from, the word rest is this powerful Hebrew word pronounced, or it's nuach. Now, we don't have this word in, pronunciation in English. It's a hard CH, almost a K sound, where we almost spit that word out, the k from the back of the throat, nuach. So just don't look at somebody when you pronounce this word. You're spitting almost at them. But this breathy nuach, but it's a powerful word. It's an awesome word. In our Bibles, it usually gets translated as rest. That's because we don't have verbs. They rested. We don't have verbs for serene, quiet, peace, tranquility, and of course, rest. So it could even mean that they peaced, they serened. But that's not good English, and so we don't say that. We just say rested. But that's what it means, all those different things. And so when you read about Sabbath rest, God rested on Sabbath. He's peacing. He's serene. He's tranquil. That's what it's starting to mean. And so now let your mind kind of wander as we talk about it. And of course, this passage from Exodus 20:11. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he nuach on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. If you want a really, really good book on the Sabbath, and some of you maybe have even read it or come across it, it's called The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. And here's what he says about nuach. He says, it is a state in which there's no strife, no fear, and no distrust. He notes that it is synonymous, nuach, with the state of life in the world to come. In other words, it's a little taste of heaven. Close to where I live, they opened up an ice cream shop that unfortunately, so tragically, with the economy, they closed. It is called Rick's Ice Cream. And I gotta tell you, this place was incredible. Now, I'm a coconut ice cream aficionado, and I judge harshly a place based upon their coconut ice cream. Is it too icy? Does it have that good coconut-rich flavor? Is it got kind of a fake flavor? There's different things I'm looking for in a good coconut ice cream. I even want little pieces of coconut in there as well. And so when I went into Rick's Ice Cream, I asked for that little spoon, that little taster. And as I took that taster and I'm letting the ice cream dance on my taste buds, you know what's in my mind. I am thinking about the waffle cone to come. That's going to be of coconut ice cream. And that's what nuach is about, heaven. Our little Sabbath is a little taster of what heaven is supposed to be about. And now you have a biblical framework. I'm going to switch gears. And let's talk about what Satan is doing to keep people from experiencing nuach on Sabbath. Now this passage, this quote I have here from Richard Swinson is not a shock to anybody, especially lately, and this was written a few years ago, where he says, no one in the history of mankind has ever had to live with the number and intensity of stressors we have acting upon us today. So on the book margin, I highly recommend the book. But hold that thought for a moment. Let me ask you this. What is the most important thing for a Christian to do? Now, a lot of times I will hear such answers. If I throw it out to a congregation, I'll hear, well, love one another. I'll hear things like evangelism. And these are all good things to do. But what's the one thing that Adam and Eve were doing in the garden? What is the one thing that we are going to be doing when we get to heaven? Worship. Number one priority. It's the issue with Adam and Eve and the snake. Who are you going to worship? It is the key issue of Revelation, the end time. Who are you going to worship? And that's why it is so fundamental to us now and to our talk about Sabbath Nuach. Let me give you the fundamental reason why Nuach is so important. Because Sabbath Nuach gives us a chance to slow down and experience Sabbath. Remember Superman's one weakness? It's kryptonite. Worship's main weakness is stress. So what happens? If you're coming stressed to church, and this happens to people all the time. In fact, even we're going to be talking about in a few moments, it happens to worship leaders. They can even lead worship, but because of stress, not worship. Isn't that crazy? You can lead worship and not worship. You can be in church and not worship. And with the great controversy, with the issue over worship, I think stress is Satan's stealth weapon. Because we don't see it. We just take it for granted. We go, it's stress. In fact, we're going to be talking about this in a few moments. We even manufacture stress in church. We bring it with us. And yet we just accept it as part of the landscape because the devil is so good, he's got us to accept it. And yet God said, no, hold on. I know what life is going to be like in 2020. And so therefore, God created Sabbath Nuach. And the crazy thing is, people will get all militant about different types of music in church and different styles of worship, but never pay attention to stress and why God created Nuach, Sabbath Nuach. Can I ask you a really dumb question? Do you think God actually knew what he was doing when he created Sabbath Nuach? Is it possible he knew what life was going to be like in 2020? That we are living in a world that is so crazy right now that we can't even get together? Do you think God actually knew that? And he says, you know what? They're going to need Sabbath Nuach, where they can just take a break from the craziness that is out there. I believe God knew. There's another thing, too, that I think we need to be cautious about. And that is, so often we have reduced the word worship to a simple concept. If I go to church, I must worship. But let me ask you this. Was worship ever an easy, simple thing for the Israelites? No, they prove it's difficult. So why do we think we are so much better than the Israelites at worship? Worship is not automatic. And yet we treat it like it's automatic. Like, if I just show up at church, of course I worshiped. Not necessarily. In fact, a lot of times I think we don't. So let's go on and talk a little more about science and Sabbath. How would you describe the ideal worship environment? Well, Jeffrey and Renata Kane describe this. They say it's making maximum connections in the brain requires a state we describe as relaxed alertness. Remember that phrase, relaxed alertness. You want to be relaxed enough, but not bored. You want to be awake. Relaxed alertness. This is a combination of low threat and high challenge. Kind of like we do with Sabbath school, this give and take. A really good sermon. You're listening, you're with the preacher, you're going, oh man, this is good stuff. You're on your edge of your seat, you're amening. That's relaxed alertness. But see, stress, it can be useful. It helps us focus on tasks. But stress also has a downside to it. It minimizes our ability to see the big picture. On your screen in front of you, you should have this picture. And I won't make you guess what it is. It's actually the pilot's view of an aircraft carrier trying to land. And here's the crazy thing. They say at this point, with a pilot trying to land on an aircraft carrier, that the pilot's IQ at this point, if they were to take an IQ test, is about that of a hamster. It's gone. There is no IQ. In fact, if you were to ask the pilot's name, the name of their mother, they probably can't tell you at this point because everything they're doing is because of muscle memory. They have practiced this maneuver, landing on an aircraft carrier, which is an extremely stressful thing to do, dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of times. And so as they're doing this, it's muscle memory under stress, because we do not want them to intellectually try to think their way down. And here's where it gets complicated. Your brain needs to be at rest in order to worship. I want you to notice the difference between these two scans of the brain. You're going to see the difference between a brain at rest and a brain at worship. And you can see the frontal lobe firing. And I can't help but think when I see that, whoa, what else does that remind me of? Where God puts his seal in the forehead, which is the worship center. Those who are worshiping God, and mankind is just discovering now that this is the worship center. So where we worship. In fact, one scientist, it's a new field of study, by the way, it's called neurotheology. One scientist actually called the frontal lobe the angel lobes, because they say that's where our worship takes place in the brain. But does that remind you of anything else? Like the seal of God? The mark of the beast, and I can't help but wonder if the mark of the beast is really, because they say it's in the hand and the forehead. Is it because they can't find rest, and so they're not worshiping here? I don't know. But scientifically and theologically, seems to make sense. Let's keep on moving. I want to continue down with science for Lane a couple more moments, but I want to introduce another term to you called downshifting. And here's what downshifting is. Just like with a car, when you downshift and you hear that, same thing happens with your brain when it has to shift down under a stress load. When we downshift, our responses become more automatic and limited. We are less able to access all that we know or see what is really there. Our ability to consider subtle environmental and internal cues is reduced. We seem less able to engage in complex intellectual tasks, those requiring creativity and the ability to engage in open-ended thinking and questioning. A great example of downshifting is test anxiety. I mean, have you ever experienced something that you're going, I know the answer, you've studied, and then you get into that moment, you're going, I can't remember. Or take this one, where you meet somebody and it's hours later and you're going, oh, why did I say that? It was the greatest comeback ever. And let me ask you this one. Why are we so clever, so funny in the shower? You're sitting there in the warm water and you come up with all kinds of great ideas. Your comebacks, you replay different exchanges in your mind. You're going, why did I say that? Well, there's that word again, relaxed alertness. Remember the ideal worship environment where your brain fires? It's low threat, high challenge. Your brain's working. That's what Sabbath Nuach is supposed to be. And David, what does he say in Psalm 8:3? He says, when I consider, and that word consider in Hebrew is this deep thought, your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars, which you have set in place. And now you are understanding why downshifting, why stress is the enemy of worship. An enemy of worship is the enemy of Sabbath. And we're needing to engage our mind fully, this relaxed alertness that God says, I know the environment for you on Sabbath because your world in 2020 is going to be nuts. And so I need you to have an environment where you can just simply be. And you can worship. And you can make all these crazy connections in your mind about how great our God is. So now that you have this biblical framework, this scientific framework too, in your mind, let's talk about some application. Application to our lives. Nehemiah 13:19 says this. When the evening shadows fell on the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I ordered the doors to be shut and not open until Sabbath was over. I stationed some of my own men at the gates so that no load can be brought in on the Sabbath. Now, let's be honest. Back in Nehemiah's day, it was an agrarian, a farming environment. Everybody farmed almost, okay? In our world, that almost rarely happens. Most of us have desk jobs. So when it says not carrying a load on the Sabbath, some of us might just dismiss that and say, oh, that's one of those old antiquated texts. But no, how do we apply that to 2020? Most of us end up carrying a mental load on Sabbath. Where Nehemiah says don't carry a load on the Sabbath, we're carrying one. We carry it home, then we carry it throughout the weekend. And even when we are given opportunities to put that mental load down, we don't. We just keep ruminating on it. When it comes to Sabbath, we struggle to unplug, to find Nuach. That's why I like the Sabbath Project. These signs they hold up, it says, I'm unplugging. I unplug to, one of my favorite ones is to hear God's voice. Sabbath. See, the problem is we don't know how to unplug. We have our smartphones here with us. We have our email. We have our social media. And unfortunately, we never unplug. In fact, the cover of Time magazine here a couple of years ago was talking about teenage anxiety. And the teenagers' inability to unplug was leading to depression and anxiety. Brings us to another point this morning. A lot of Christians only think of Sabbath Nuach, the Sabbath blessing, if we want to call that, in a passive sense. Dare I say, a narcissistic sense, like my Sabbath blessing, I was blessed on Sabbath. Okay, that's good, we want to be blessed on Sabbath. But we almost never, ever think about other people's Sabbath blessing. And in fact, if you read much of the Old Testament, it's about taking and dispensing Sabbath Nuach to those around us. One of those passages would be Exodus 23:12. It says this, 6 days do you work, but on the seventh day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest. There it is, Nuach. Your donkey may Nuach. And so the slave born in a household and a foreigner living among you may be refreshed. God is even saying, I want my animals to experience Nuach. Isn't that crazy? He wants you and I to experience Nuach, and he wants our animals to experience Nuach. But see, a lot of our Sabbath keeping is self-centered. It's just about me. I don't care about your Nuach. I just want my Nuach. That's not biblical. See, I have to care about your Nuach too. In fact, if you do a study, about like half the passages talking about Sabbath are talking about taking the blessings of the Sabbath, Nuach, and dispensing those to those around us. In one of history's crazy backwards moments, Stalin takes one of his chief aircraft designers, Andrei Tupolev, and on trumped-up charges, throws him into a work camp during World War II and says, now I want you to design world-class airplane designs. I don't know about you, but let's talk about Redwood Camp Meeting for a second, okay? If Redwood Camp Meeting has a downside, it's the bathrooms. I know people who don't want to go to camp meeting because of the bathrooms. A work camp is not going to have anything better. In fact, they'll be lucky if they have anything as good as we have at Redwood Camp Meeting. And to design in that type of environment, you just say, you know what? No, we know what the ideal environment is. That's relaxed alertness. And if you're going, I hate this place, that is not going to be conducive to Nuach, to this learning environment. And unfortunately, we have way too many churches that are like Stalin. We will spend thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of dollars on evangelism and have a very un-Nuach environment. You know what that's like? It's like fishing with a hole in your net. It's throwing money away. We try to bring these people in, and as soon as they come in and they get a feel for the place, they are gone. And then we kind of throw up our hands going, what's wrong with these people? Where's their Christian experience? Well, now we need to start looking at ourselves and going, maybe it's us. Maybe they're actually healthy and they recognize that we are not healthy with our non-Nuach environment and they left. And that's a very sad commentary because I can't tell you how many churches I've been in. I've even pastored a couple that I was saying, if I wasn't the pastor of this church, I would not attend here. And I know as a pastor, I'm not alone. I've known a number of pastors who have said that. And then we wonder why people don't want to come to church. Maybe because they're too healthy to be in some of our non-Nuach environments. Because honestly, I believe if we created a Nuach environment, that in itself, people are stressed out of their minds. They need what we have. Let me give you some examples because to this point, you're probably going, well, what are you talking about? Because I know when I've talked with people about, stress in church, people kind of look at me a little crazy. I've gotten used to that until I start giving them examples. I mean, the easy ones are controlling people. Nobody wants to be around mean, negative, controlling people. Church conflict. Nobody likes that either, except for some crazy people. And you know another one too? No friends. You have no friends in church? You're like, I'm not sure I really want to stay here. I mean, it's like being in a cafeteria when you're a kid and you don't have anybody to sit with. That is not comfortable. Same thing with church. Let me give you a few others real fast about what Sabbath is like. And let me give you an illustration. We talk about carrying a load on the Sabbath. It's kind of like holding a brick. A brick. And yet we will start giving people bricks of stress on Sabbath. And we don't think anything about it. One of those issues is just getting to church. Sometimes we forget, people with young children, how stressful it can be just to get to church. Maybe it's a marriage where one is a member of the church and the other one is not a believer. And every time that person goes to church, there is conflict. I know in women who, when church was over, started getting nervous because their spouse was going to be angry if they took too much time at church. Intrusive questions. I'm not kidding. This was a question that my parents got asked, specifically my mom, when they were going through a divorce. How's the divorce going? I'm not kidding. Intrusive questions can sometimes be extremely inappropriate in a Nuach environment because where did my mom's mind immediately go? It goes to the divorce. She's wanting to forget the divorce on Sabbath. She wants to experience Nuach, some tranquility, instead of the mess that her marriage was in. Believe it or not, poorly run AV, when you get horrible feedback and it creates tension or maybe something doesn't work, that's even a stressor as well. Kids screaming. I mean, if you got some kids in the pew in front of you that are squirming and screaming, and you're trying to worship, guess what? You're probably not doing too well with worship. And so there needs to be some way that we help our young families, and yet sometimes our young families also need to be aware that while they may be used to the sound of their kids, those around them may not be. And so there's this give and take that we've got to work together with young families, make our churches friendly enough for them, and yet we also need our young families to understand too that what they do may be taken away from people's ability to even listen to the worship service as well. A moral fall. If, we'll take a stereotypical thing. What if a husband's wife has left him or has had an affair? How does he feel when he goes to church? We might think, well, he feels fine. No, he doesn't. He probably feels guilty, like, what did I do to contribute to this? Or what about a parent whose child has strayed from the church and they hear sermons about, bring up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And they start thinking, what did I do wrong? A moral fall in the family can be a hugely stressful thing, and so we need to be very careful in the church of how we have those conversations, and also recognize that grace is needed for these individuals who maybe with their immediate family have somebody who's struggling. But we say, we still want you to come. Even if your family member isn't coming with you, we still want you to be here. We're going to love you here. Non-Nuach talk. I remember I talked to one of my elders once and said, how's work going? And immediately his face just changed. And he goes, oh, I got a new boss, and she's just been riding us. And where was his mind? Was his mind talking about Nuach and Sabbath and all, how great this is? No, I just took him back into the work week. We've got to be careful about our questions. Some of our questions, not just the intrusive ones, like how's the divorce going, but sometimes even something as simple as how's work can be extremely inappropriate. Being an outsider, if your family is, socially, economically not on the same level as other families in church, or maybe you don't speak the language as well, different ethnicities, all kinds of ways to be an outsider. What if you're single and it's a family church, and every time you talk about family and you're going, I'm single, but they say family, and I don't have a family here. We have to be really aware of some of the stressors we create in church and wonder then, why do people leave? Maybe because we created stress for them. Introversion. A lot of times we create church, we define spirituality by being an extrovert. I'm an extrovert. I like talking to people. But my wife is not. So when you say, stand up and greet one another, I mean, she's almost at that point going, okay, you just kill me now. I'm like, hey, who can I talk to? We need to be aware that fully 50% of our churches are probably introverts. And they hate that time. In fact, guess what? The number one thing guests hate. Stand up and greet those around you. So if you're really a church that's interested in evangelism and bringing people in, you may really want to rethink that one. So the big question comes in, am I helping people's new walk? Am I taking away from it? What can we do? And here's another problem we do with Sabbath. And that is, we sometimes make Sabbath such a busy day, we load it up. I know some churches, and they want to have a church board meeting on it because, hey, everybody's available. Just because you have the day off and people are available doesn't mean you should just load it up like any other day. You're taken away from Nuach. I mean, who says, a board meeting to me sounds like Nuach, said no one. Archibald Hart, he says this, he says, much church activity is unfortunately geared to make us even busier on Sundays, and he's talking about Sunday instead of Saturday, but the principle still applies. I believe this can be a pitfall. If you're not slowing down significantly on your day of rest, you're going against God's intent as well as courting stress damage. We have to make sure that Sabbath, we don't load it up with all kinds of, quotes, good stuff. And at the end of the day, we didn't rest. And I've known way too many churches that will do that. Well-intentioned. And as a ministry leader, if we're rushing around, we can be in church on Sabbath and not experience Nuach and therefore not worship. Can I be honest with you? That same picture of the pilot landing on an aircraft carrier is oftentimes what your ministry leaders view church as. They're so focused on the task. Maybe they got to be up front. Maybe they're a little bit nervous about being up front. So they're only focused on that little segment about being up front. And I'll just be honest, as a pastor, I'm worried about the worship service. Is AV going to do the job right? Deacons, are they going to get the air conditioning right this week? My sermon, I got to think about my sermon. I can attend church. I can be in charge of the worship service. At the end of the day, if I was not intentional, I can leave church and not have worshiped because I had no Nuach. Because I was so focused on church, doing church, but not worshiping. And so this is a warning to people that, one, don't bring bricks to others. I've known people who they would see the school teacher and they'd come up and want to do an impromptu parent-teacher conference. I've known principals who would come to church late and leave early because they didn't want to talk to the parents. They just wanted to worship. And pastors, it's a job. You can become a casual of the job, your worship. Because people come after church and they want to talk to you about everything. Things that really shouldn't be dealt with on Sabbath, like the parking lot. I saw weeds growing in the parking lot. We really need to repaint this church. What does that have to do with Sabbath? Nothing. And yet we will load Sabbath with these bricks. And so I want you to have the concept of a brick. that we will load the pastor, we will load ministry leaders with bricks. Then we say, Happy Sabbath. No. If we're serious about Sabbath, we have to be serious about Sabbath Nuach. Serious about worship. Just think for a moment, though. What our churches would be like if they had a reputation for being Sabbath Nuach churches. Think about it. You don't have to go to a bar to find friends, because you're going to a church and you're going, these people genuinely care about me. They want me to experience Nuach. I can worship. I want to leave you with a story. Perhaps you've heard of the Confederate prison camp Andersonville in Georgia. In Andersonville, it was an awful, awful place. You could probably describe it at that time as hell on earth. 13,000 Union soldiers died in that camp alone. 13,000. That is a lot of people to die in a prison camp. That's not in battle. That's in a prison camp, dying from dysentery, dying from other kinds of diseases. And here's one of the crazy, sad ironies of history. Andersonville sits on one of the world's great deposits of kaolin. Kaolin has been used to curb the effects of dysentery, one of the main killers of those soldiers. Now, maybe you go and hold it. I've never heard of kaolin. Yes, you have. You just know it by its commercial name, kaopectate. And the irony, the cruel irony of history is Andersonville sits on one of the world's great deposits of kaolin, and yet during the Civil War, thousands of soldiers are dying from the effects of something that could have been helped that they were standing on top of. We as a church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, are given this incredible gift called the Sabbath. Sabbath Nuach. Something that people are dying for in 2020. People are saying, I am so stressed out. We have something that our post-Christian stressed out world is needing. And my question is, have you even discovered Sabbath Nuach yet? And the main reason you and I are here today is to worship. I got to call you to this. I got to call you to worship, to marvel, to consider, as David says, our incredible God, who in his infinite wisdom could look into the future and say in 2020, they are going to need Sabbath Nuach. Because without it, it's going to be impossible to worship. That's the God I want to call you to worship right now. I want to leave you with this. Hebrews 4, 9 and 11. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest. May you experience God's rich Nuach in your worship experience. And then may you take those same Nuach blessings and may you dispense them to those around you.
Hello all, and thank you for watching
this 2020 virtual Redwood area camp meeting video.
We are striving to reach the needed YouTube subscriptions
so that we can change the name to something a human would understand.
Please visit the website for
what is coming up.
Don't forget to sign up for
announcements on the website.
Please consider helping us with
our budget needs for this year,
so we can be ready for camp next year.
Please keep our camp
in your prayers
as we traverse
these trying times.
We can always use
your help at the camp
if you want to come
and put your skills to use.
Once again, thank you so much
for joining us, and we look forward
to getting together again in 2021.